Hello, everybody. So I thought I'd go back to this issue of Trump and COVID and the possibility that Trump released it, or Biden released it, or that Boris released it, possibly, or perhaps even that the Chinese released it to cull their own population. Which, in order of likelihood, I think it probably goes Boris, Biden, Trump, the Chinese themselves, and I think I'm going to stick with that. But just going back to these things that Trump was saying to reporters about not being allowed to tell people about where this virus came from, but it came from the Wuhan lab. He supposedly has evidence that it did come from the Wuhan lab, but he's not allowed to talk about it. What does he mean he's not allowed to talk about it? He is the commander in chief at this point, anyway. What do you mean he's not allowed to talk about it? He's the most powerful man in the world. The president of the United States is not allowed to talk about something. Is he being put under duress? And if so, by who? Who's saying that he's not allowed to talk about something? Is it his cabinet? Is it his minders? Is it people like joints? Is it chiefs of staff? Is it intelligence officials saying you can't talk about this? If you do, bad things are going to happen to you, and so on, like that. Because yeah, that could well be the case. So I can't tell you that. Trump said when a reporter asked what information gave him a high degree of confidence that the virus came from the lab, he said, "I'm not allowed to tell you that." The officer of the Director of National Intelligence put out a statement on Thursday saying the US intelligence community agrees with a wide scientific consensus that the coronavirus was not man-made or genetically modified. Now, when it comes to this wide scientific consensus, there isn't a wide scientific consensus on it. If you look through the journals and some of the things that I've been quoting, say from the Lancet and so on, they're not ruling out actually that this did come from the lab in Wuhan. There is not a scientific consensus if you look at the literature. So putting that to one side, and good scientists with integrity would not have said that. But this is an article back from April in 2020. So whatever the scientific consensus was then, perhaps really back then the scientific community were in denial about this. The statement said intelligence agencies agree. Intelligence agencies will continue to rigorously examine whether the virus was the result of an accident in a laboratory in Wuhan. Okay, in spite of the fact they agree with the wide scientific consensus that it didn't come from them. Multiple intelligence officials told the New York Times, Politico, and other outlets that there is no evidence so far to back up the theory that the coronavirus was created in or escaped from a Wuhan lab. Except, I think what really amounts to less circumstantial evidence and more a pretty robust claim that we'd be seeing cases of direct zoonotic transmission of SARS-CoV-2 from horseshoe bats in North China, wouldn't we? If it had, because I think the scientific consensus states that as an animal source of it, it must have spread from the horseshoe bat population to the population of pangolins, then to humans. Chinese officials back in November and December of 2019 started covering all this up, trying to make it all go away, and jumping on this fish market with this supposed live animal market also with pangolins. We can only assume. Where is this pangolin? Did the Chinese not, in their efforts to fight the spread of the virus, actually hit upon the source of the virus from a pangolin, from an actual bat being sold at a fish market? Is that not part of tracing it and doing science and epidemiology and trying to find out the original source of the virus? So they said they found samples of COVID-19 at the fish market on surfaces, I think, not actually from an animal source. So where is this animal? The Chinese must have it, surely. And if they had it, why not release it? But why not release information about it? Seems like they were presenting evidence, and what we expect to believe you, the Chinese Communist Party. Okay, so we'll believe you so long as there is the evidence. But as they told the World Health Organization, yet not the public. And they told the World Health Organization, but the World Health Organization hasn't told us. Why would they not do that? Why would they do that? And also another thing when it comes back to this statement put out by intelligence officials in the United States, they may well be sort of just being like diplomatic and smoothing things over more than anything else. And they're like, we're not going to, during the early days of a pandemic, start making sort of any inflammatory claims which implicate the Chinese in any way, because that's probably, the thing, what we want least at the moment is to do anything which could lead to a war with China, frankly, during a pandemic. Would be such a wise international relations move, would it? Saying those sorts of things. But at some point, and probably when this is all over, there's going to have to be accountability. And I think, part of that is going to have to fall on China. But I think the other part is going to have to fall on other people for this. Because, no one gets away with killing 2 million people, either deliberately or accidentally. President Donald Trump said on Thursday he has evidence showing that the coronavirus originated from lab in Wuhan, China, but he can't share what it is. How very unusual. So from the Wuhan Institute of Virology, I have a high degree of confidence that it did as well. As I have, Trump said before going on a tangent about the World Health Organization accusing the group of being a public relations agency for China. For her. She's telling the truth. You shouldn't be making excuses when people make horrible mistakes, Trump said, especially mistakes that are causing hundreds of thousands of people on the world to die. I think the World Health Organization should be ashamed of themselves. Then again, let's try and focus back in, I think, on the hypothesis that Trump had something to do with this release of COVID. So, 2 people in the immediate days leading up to the development of the pandemic, Trump possibly did have a vested interest in releasing the virus to fulfill his campaign promise of being tough on China. Boris Johnson said the virus was released on the 17th of November, or rather 14 days prior to November the 17th. So before the incubation period, before the first case shows up in China, could well have been of the thinking that this would have developed into a pandemic in the days leading up to the election in the UK in 2019. That is very plausible, I think, to me anyway. And possibly Biden had nothing to do with it. However, his son does have business links with China, so a little bit of fishiness there, I think. However, we also have Trump, I think, back in, sort of autumn of 2019, September-ish time, saying that there's all these concerns about safety with the Wuhan lab. I'm going to try and look that up again. So that's, I think, another thing. Why is he saying it back then? Or was it in 2020? Trump safety concerns Wuhan lab. State Department cables warned of safety issues at. Okay, this is in the opinion department of the Washington Post. This might need to be taken with a bit. So, State Department cables warned of safety issues at Wuhan lab studying bat coronaviruses. 2 years before the novel coronavirus pandemic upended the world. Fuck off, adverts. Oh God. Upended the world. US embassy officials visited a Chinese research facility in the city of Wuhan several times and sent 2 official warnings back to Washington about inadequate safety of the lab, which was conducting risk studies on coronaviruses from bats. The cables have fueled discussions inside the US government about whether this or another Wuhan lab was the source of the other labs in Wuhan. Even though conclusive proof has yet to emerge. In January 2018, The US Embassy in Beijing took the unusual step of repeatedly sending US science diplomats to the Wuhan Virology Institute of Virology, which had in 2015 become China's first laboratory to achieve the highest level of international bioresearch safety, known as BSL-4. WIV issued a news release in English about the last of these visits, which occurred on March 27, 2018. The US delegation was led by Jameson Foos, the Consul General in Wuhan, and Rick Switzer, the Embassy Counselor of Environment, Science, Technology and Health. Last week, WIV erased that statement from its website, though it remains archived on the internet. Okay. Which is typical of the Chinese when it comes to their propaganda and their cultivation of their own images, their image. What the US officials learned during their visits concerned them so much that they dispatched 2 diplomatic cables, categorized as sensitive but unclassified, back to Washington. Cables warned about safety and management weaknesses at the WIV lab and proposed more attention and help. The first cable, which I obtained, also warns that labs work on bat coronaviruses and the potential human transmission presented a risk of a new SARS-like pandemic. During interactions with scientists at WIP laboratory, noted the new lab had a serious shortage of appropriately trained technicians and investigators needed to safely operate this high containment laboratory, states January 19, 2018 cable, which was drafted by 2 officials from the Embassy Environment, Science and Health sections who met the WIV scientists. The State Department declined to comment on this and other details of the story. Chinese researchers were at WIV were receiving assistance from the Galveston National Laboratory at the University of Texas Medical Branch and other US organizations, but the Chinese requested additional help. Cables urged that the United States should give the Wuhan lab further support, mainly because its research on bat coronaviruses was important but also dangerous. As the cable noted, the US visitors met with Shi Zhengli, the head of the research project, who had been publishing studies related to bat coronaviruses for many years. In November 2017, just before the US officials visited, Xi's team had published research showing that horseshoe bats they had collected from a cave in Yunnan province were very likely from the same bat population that spawned the SARS coronavirus in 2003. Most importantly, the cable states the researchers also showed that various SARS-like coronaviruses can interact with ACE2, the human receptor identified for SARS coronavirus. The findings strongly suggested that SARS-like coronaviruses from bats can be transmitted to humans to cause SARS-like diseases. From a public health perspective, this makes the continued surveillance of SARS-like coronaviruses in bats and study of the animal-human interface critical to future emerging coronavirus outbreak prediction and prevention. The research was designed to prevent the next SARS-like pandemic by anticipating how it might escape. Even in 2015, other scientists questioned whether Xi's team was taking unnecessary risks. In October 2014, the US government had imposed a moratorium on funding of any research that makes the virus more deadly or contagious, known as gain-of-function experiments. As many pointed out, there is no evidence that the virus now plaguing the world was engineered. Scientists largely agree it came from animals. It's not the same thing as saying it didn't come from the lab, which spent years testing bat coronaviruses in animals, said Xiao Qiang, a research scientist at the School of Information at the University of California, Berkeley. Cable tells us that there have long been concerns about the possibility of the threat to public health that came from this lab's research if it was not being adequately conducted and protected, he said. There are similar concerns about the nearby Wuhan Center for Disease Control and Prevention lab, or another one in Wuhan, which operates at biosecurity level 2, a level significantly less secure than the level 4 standards claimed by Wuhan Institute of Virology lab, Xiao said. That's important because the Chinese government still refuses to answer basic questions about the origin of the novel coronavirus, while suppressing any attempts to examine whether the lab was involved. Sources, well, what does that say? Sources familiar with the lab said that they were meant to sound an alarm about the grave safety concerns of the WIV lab, especially regarding its work with bat coronaviruses. The embassy officials were calling for more US attention to this lab and more support for it to help fix its problems. If you've got nothing to hide, they have nothing to hide, do they? The cable was a warning shot when US officials said they were begging people to pay attention to what was going on. No extra assistance to the lab was provided by the US government in response to these cables. Oh dear. The cables began to circulate again inside the administration over the past 2 months as officials debated whether the lab could be the origin of the pandemic and what the implications would be for the US pandemic response and relations with China. Inside the Trump administration, many national security officers have long suspected that either the WIB or the Wuhan Center of Disease Control and Prevention lab was the source of the novel coronavirus outbreak. That's a little bit different to the official line, isn't it? According to the New York Times, exactly, the intelligence community has provided no evidence. Management Business Insider, has provided no evidence to confirm this, but one senior administration official told me that the cables provided one more piece of evidence to support the possibility that the pandemic is the result of a lab accident in Wuhan. The idea that it was just a totally natural occurrence is circumstantial. The evidence it leaked from the lab is circumstantial. Right now, the ledger on the sides of it leaking from the lab is packed with bullet points, and there's almost nothing on the other side. Yeah, the ledger on the side of it leaking from the lab is packed with bullet points. There's almost nothing on the other side. Yeah, nothing really. Almost, yeah. I think really when it comes to the science involved, the scientific assumptions you need to invoke to assert that it came from a natural source, like a wild bat or a bat being sold at a market in Wuhan, you need to take quite a big leap of logic. You invoke, big numbers and very low orders of probability to seriously entertain that notion. As my colleague David Ignatius noted, the Chinese government's original story that the virus emerged from a seafood market in Wuhan is shaky, to say the very least. Research by Chinese experts published in The Lancet in January showed the first known patient, identified on December 1st, had no connection to the market, nor did more than 1/3 of the cases in the first large cluster. Also, the market didn't sell bats. Wow, I didn't know that. She and other WIB researchers have categorically denied this lab was the origin. Well, they would, wouldn't they? Was the origin for the novel coronavirus. On February 3rd, her team was first to publicly report the virus known as 2009 nCoV was a bat-derived coronavirus. Why all the secrecy though on the part of China? Other than to protect their reputation, maybe it's also to protect the fact that they work on biowarfare and they don't want people to know about that. It's something worth considering. Chinese government, meanwhile, has put a total lockdown on information related to the virus origins. Beijing has yet to provide US experts with samples of the novel coronavirus collected from the earliest cases. Exactly. Shanghai lab that published the novel coronavirus genome on January 11th was quickly shut down by authorities for rectification. Oh, good sake. What, re-education courses and things like this. Several of the doctors and journalists who reported on the spread early on have disappeared. Bloody hell. November 14th, President Xi Jinping called for a new biosecurity law to be accelerated. On Wednesday, CNN reported the Chinese government has severe restrictions requiring approval before any research institution publishes anything on the origin of the novel coronavirus. The origin story is not just about blame. It's crucial to understanding how the novel coronavirus pandemic started, because that informs how to prevent the next one. The Chinese government must also be transparent and answer the question about the Wuhan labs because they are vital to our scientific understanding of the virus, said Xiao. We don't know whether the novel coronavirus originated in the Wuhan lab. Okay, but the KO pointed out to the danger there and increases the impetus to find out, he said. I don't think it's a conspiracy theory. I think it's a legitimate question that needs to be investigated and answered, he said. To understand exactly how this originated is critical knowledge for preventing this from happening in the future. Well, a theory is a series of hypotheses which are supported by evidence. And yet not all theories were created equal. And I certainly don't believe that one should write this off as a conspiracy theory. Legitimate concern is more like, I think, the vernacular you should invoke with this sort of matter. 2 million people dead, concerns being raised in 2018 as to safety standards in this lab in Wuhan under the Trump administration, and yet nothing was done about those concerns. Why not? Is he hoping that China will fuck up in some way? And that what he's hoping for is that something will get out? Maybe, and this is another sort of speculation, piece of conjecture. Maybe he's hoping for something like a SARS outbreak in China. Something like a SARS level sort of deal. An outbreak of something like SARS. A few thousand people infected, a couple of hundred people dead. And you can use that to then place more economic pressure in the international community on China. Perhaps that's what he's hoping for. However, the more I look into sort of specific details, or any details I can find, on the way in which the virus broke out. This first case, December 17th, then November the 1st, then in January. I mean, and what were the Chinese officials doing about fighting this virus all the time? It seems like they're doing nothing about it, but they must have been. And yeah, covering it all up. And they must have been, I can only imagine fighting it in secret, but then it gets out again and again and again. And we have this pandemic. So it accidental, I don't think it would have been accidental. I think someone tried to cause a pandemic, a real one. And that leads me back to Boris and Biden. A pharmaceutical interest and elections and this, that, the other. And yeah, from the Biden perspective, it does seem like it would be convenient to place the blame on Trump. He said all this stuff in the past about inadequate safety in the Wuhan facility. And yeah, trying to pursue his campaign of discrediting the Chinese. And wouldn't it be so awful if it backfired on him? And also, wouldn't it be convenient for us if we can throw Donald Trump in the frame for COVID and having caused it in China to further discredit the Chinese and place further economic pressure on the Chinese and so on? You see what I mean? So that's one avenue of consideration. Yeah, but accident. They really want to stress that if anything, it was an accident. You know what I mean? I wouldn't have said so. If this Italy report is to be believed, it's in September when it first shows up in Italy in cancer patients. We've got good, solid evidence. I think the first case on the 17th of November, then the 1st of December, then getting January. So it looks like it gets out once, they clamp down on it. It gets out again, they clamp down on it. Got a 14-day incubation period. So from the 1st of December to the 1st of January, or into sometime in January, I think. And yeah, they got these 14 days cases, no more cases, it seems. Oh, it shows up again. It's getting out deliberately. I think that to say it got out once accidentally, that I believe, but a quick succession of new releases of the same thing in such a short period of time. Again, you ask me to believe something which is a really big stretch. That it was released accidentally on several different occasions at a fish market in Wuhan that doesn't sell bats. Smeared on stuff. There's no accident. Sorry, and then look at the geography of it. It's at this Wuhan fish market in Wuhan. That is a half an hour drive away from the lab. You got to go through residential districts and everything else to get there. Where the virus didn't seem to show up really to begin with, but it seemed to show up in this market because I assume they would have chosen whoever it was who was behind this, that market, to be the place to release it. That seems like the place where it's most likely, or where it could most plausibly have arisen from a natural zoonotic source, i.e. from an animal as a market, as opposed to that lab. However, I still get the impression that whoever was behind releasing it still really wanted it to be traced back to that Wuhan lab with ties to the States, France, and Canada, so that they get thrown in the frame. And I'm back to considering Boris and NHS considerations, and GlaxoSmithKline and AstraZeneca, and so on, for every other reason they would, making money from the vaccine and so on and so forth. And yeah, And we've got this big thing now with like, saving NHS's fucking reputation. It's obviously not just me complaining about the atrocious treatment at the in mental health services. There's lots of other people also. And maybe like that, yeah. As one of the few people writing about it online, though, I don't know. And it seems like I've been involved in some government corruption in my life, and so on. And this woman, my father's girlfriend, her son, GlaxoSmithKline connection. Anyway, that's my video for now. Thank you very much. Bye.